Last year, I signed into law $1.7 trillion in deficit reduction. Tonight's agreement further reduces the deficit by raising $620 billion in revenue from the wealthiest households in America.
Back to work. In his first policy speech since re-election, U.S. President Barack Obama invited congressional leaders to the White House to start negotiating a deal, one that would prevent the so-called fiscal cliff of sharp tax hikes and spending cuts from going into effect at the end of the year.
So what we now have is a situation where these automatic spending cuts go into place. Now, if we have raised some revenue by the wealthy paying a little bit more, that would be sufficient to turn off what's called the sequester, these automatic spending cuts. If we're serious about reducing the deficit, we have to combine spending cuts with revenue.
Put the white on the flam for your temper. Just toss that ham in the frying pan like spam and done when
what we said was give us $1.2 trillion in additional revenues, which could be accomplished without hiking tax rates, but could simply be accomplished by eliminating loopholes, eliminating some deductions, and engaging in a tax reform process that could have lowered rates generally while broadening the base.
President Obama's plan, a balanced approach that asks the wealthy to pay a little more, cuts government spending, and reduces the deficit by $4 trillion.
As much of the world was ringing in the new year, lawmakers on Capitol Hill were ringing in a plan to avoid the so-called fiscal cliff.
The bill, as amended, is passed.
But what exactly is in it? Here are some highlights of the plan passed by the Senate. The measure would raise taxes by about $600 billion over 10 years. It extends decade-old tax cuts on incomes of up to $400,000 for individuals or $450,000 for couples. Earnings above that would be taxed at 39.6%, up from 35%. It would raise taxes on capital gains and dividend income for people with those earnings from 15 to 20%. It permanently addresses the alternative minimum tax and indexes it for inflation. This will prevent nearly 30 million middle and upper middle income taxpayers from being hit with higher tax bills. It extends for 5 years expansions of the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, and a tax credit for college tuition. It extends jobless benefits for the long-term unemployed for 1 year. It would delay for 2 months across-the-board cuts to Pentagon and other agencies' budgets. It blocks a 27% cut in Medicare payments to doctors for 1 year. And it restores the payroll tax to 6.2%. The House is expected to vote on the bill sometime either Tuesday or Wednesday. Jerry Bodlander, Associated Press.
I refuse to accept any approach that isn't balanced. And there will be more deficit reduction as Congress decides what to do about the automatic spending cuts that we have now delayed for 2 months. I want to make this point. As I've demonstrated throughout the past several weeks, I am very open to compromise.
Mr. President, my office submitted our latest offer to the Majority Leader last night at 7:10 p.m. and offered to work through the night to find common ground. The Majority Leader staff informed us they'd be getting back to us this morning at 10 a.m. despite the obvious time crunch we all have. It's now 2 p.m., and we've yet to receive a response to our good faith offer. Now, I'm concerned about the lack of urgency here. I think we all know we're running out of time. This is far too much at stake for political gamesmanship. We need to protect the American families and businesses from this looming tax hike. Everyone agrees that that action is necessary. In order to get things moving, I've just spoken with the Majority Leader. I also placed a call to the Vice President to see if he could help jumpstart the negotiations on his side. The Vice President and I have worked together on solutions before, and I believe we can again. I want my colleagues to know that we'll keep everyone updated. The consequences of this are too high for the American people to be engaged in a political messaging campaign. I'm interested in getting a result here. I was here all day yesterday. As I indicated, we submitted our latest proposal at 7 p.m. last night. We're willing to work with whoever can help. There's no single issue that remains an impossible sticking point. The sticking point appears to be a willingness and interest, or frankly, the courage to close the deal. I want everyone to know I'm willing to get this done, but I need a dance partner.
Mr. President.
Leader.
We have been negotiating now for 36 hours or thereabouts. We did have conversations last night that ended late in the evening between staffs. This morning, we've been trying to come up with some counteroffer to my friend's proposal. We have been unable to do that. I've had a number of conversations with the President, and at this stage, we're not able to make a counteroffer. The Republican leader has told me that, and he's just said here that he's working with the Vice President, and he and the Vice President, I wish them well. In the meantime, and I will continue to try to come up with something, but at this stage, I don't have a counteroffer to make. Perhaps as the day wears on, I will be able to. I will say this. I think that the Republican leader has shown absolutely good faith. It's just that we're apart on some pretty big issues.
And can you put your finger on what it was that President Obama didn't have or didn't do?
He does not have the relations with these people. For instance, specifically, Joe Biden has this relationship with Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, and he's known in the West Wing, Biden is the McConnell whisperer, the person who can deal with McConnell. They've known each other for decades. They don't agree on things, but it's the kind of old deal-making philosophy, one for you, one for me. And at key points in this 3.5-year period, it's Biden who comes and bails the administration and the president.
Of Politics, which will be published on September 11, Bob Woodward gives a blow-by-blow account of the effort to reach a so-called grand bargain, spending cuts and tax increases to cut the deficit. The deal was tantalizingly close, but broke down near the end when Woodward says the president asked Boehner to agree to more tax increases. For Boehner, that was a deal breaker. He wasn't going to get a damn dime more out of me, Boehner told Woodward. At a critical juncture, Boehner didn't even bother to return the president's phone calls. When they finally connected, Boehner tells Woodward the furious president was, quote, spewing coals. The president acknowledged he was angry, but also tells Woodward he had, quote, some sympathy for Boehner because he just couldn't control extremists in the new Tea Party Congress. You see how crazy these people are. I understand him, the president said. To Woodward, the total breakdown of the talks reflected badly on everyone. It was increasingly clear that no one was running Washington. That was trouble for everyone, but especially for Obama. Woodward shows an almost complete lack of communications between Republicans and the White House. In fact, Diane, when Republicans won the House in 2010, the president wanted to call John Boehner to congratulate him, and nobody in the White House had his phone number.
I agree with Democrats and Republicans that the aging population and the rising cost of health care makes Medicare the biggest contributor to our deficit. I believe we've got to find ways to reform that program without hurting seniors who count on it to survive.
I will actually give you a speech made up entirely, almost at the spur of the moment, of what a candidate for president would say if that candidate did not care about becoming president. In other words, this is what the truth is, and a candidate will never say, but what candidates should say if we were in a kind of democracy where citizens were honored in terms of their practice of citizenship, and they were educated in terms of what the issues were, and they could separate myth from reality in terms of what candidates would tell them. I'm so glad to see you, and I would like to be president. Let me tell you a few things on health care. Look, we have the only health care system in the world that is designed to avoid sick people. And that's true, and what I'm going to do is I am going to try to reorganize it to be more amenable to treating sick people. But that means you, particularly you young people, particularly you young healthy people, you're going to have to pay more. Thank you. And by the way, we are going to have to, if you're very old, we're not going to give you all that technology and all those drugs for the last couple of years of your life to keep you maybe going for another couple of months. It's too expensive, so we're going to let you die. Also, I'm going to use the bargaining leverage of the federal government in terms of Medicare, Medicaid. We already have a lot of bargaining leverage to force drug companies and insurance companies and medical suppliers to reduce their costs. But that means less innovation, and that means less new products and less new drugs on the market, which means you are probably not going to live that much longer than your parents. Thank you.
And I believe that there's further unnecessary spending in government that we can eliminate. But we can't simply cut our way to prosperity. Cutting spending has to go hand in hand with further reforms to our tax code so that the wealthiest corporations and individuals can't take advantage of loopholes and deductions that aren't available to most Americans. And we can't keep cutting things like basic research and new technology and still expect to succeed in a 21st century economy.
Look, I'm all in favor of green energy. $90 billion. That would have hired 2 million teachers. $90 billion. And these businesses, many of them have gone out of business. I think about half of them, of the ones that have been invested in, have gone out of business. A number of them happen to be owned by people who are contributors to your campaigns.
So Stu Varney, anchor of Varney & Company, Fox Business Network, good morning to you. What's the deal with this company out of Massachusetts?
It is another green energy bust. A123 makes electric car batteries. They were supposed to repay some of their debt today. They can't come up with the money. Furthermore, they say they might not have enough cash just to stay in business, so they are going to explore going into bankruptcy. Now, this follows the bankruptcy of N01. That's another electric car battery maker, bankrupt some time ago. The sole reason here, Bill, is quite frankly that we're not buying electric-powered cars. Even with $4 gas, sales of the Volt, for example, have been extremely disappointing. We're not buying the cars. We're not using those batteries. Down go the battery companies. Another green energy bust.
Are you putting this company in the cylinder category?
It's very close, yes, because they were given, A123 was given $249 million in grants. That's not loan guarantees. That's a check.
So we're going to have to continue to move forward in deficit reduction, but we have to do it in a balanced way, making sure that we are growing even as we get a handle on our spending. Now, one last point I want to make. While I will negotiate over many things, I will not have another debate with this Congress over whether or not they should pay the bills that they've already racked up through the laws that they passed. Let me repeat. We can't not pay bills that we've already incurred.
The Treasury Department said last week that we will hit the debt ceiling again near the end of the year. Are you prepared?
I think the debt ceiling will come after the first year. But please, everyone, accept this. They tried it before. They, the Republicans. They tried it before. We're going to shut down the government, and we're not going to raise the debt ceiling. If they want to go through that again, fine. But we're not going to be held subject to something that was done as a matter of fact in all previous administrations.
So will you support raising it by another $2.4 trillion?
If it has to be raised, we'll raise it.
Let's start with President Obama. Here's White House spokesman Jay Carney this afternoon.
We cannot play chicken with the economy in this way. It's just too darn risky. It is not appropriate.
Too risky, not appropriate. Here's Senator Obama on March 16, 2006, explaining why he was voting against raising the debt ceiling then. Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices, he said, today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Americans deserve better, he said. I therefore intend to oppose the effort to increase America's debt limit. So that's 180 degrees opposite from his position now. And here's how spokesman Robert Gibbs explained when the question first came up back in January.
This quote from the senator. The fact that we're here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. Leadership means the buck stops here. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Americans deserve better. I therefore intend to oppose the effort to increase America's debt limit. I suspect you know who I'm quoting.
Joe Biden.
That is Senator Barack Obama in 2006 voting against raising the debt
And I think
ceiling.
what is important is it's understand that the raising the debt limit was not in question in the outcome.
52 to 48.
In the outcome of that vote.
It's a close vote. 50 to 48.
Well, we've had closer. I think I think it's important that the outcome, based on the outcome of that vote, as I mentioned, the full faith and credit was not in doubt. Full faith and credit of our government and our economy was not in doubt. And the president used it to make a point about needing to get serious about fiscal discipline. And we, as I said earlier, are dealing with the legacy of decisions that have been made over the past many years, not paying for a prescription drug benefit, not paying for wars, not paying for tax cuts that changed our fiscal situation much more markedly than anything ever had. So I think it is up to, and it's important for Congress, because we know not to play politics with this, not to play games, to find a way to raise that debt limit, understanding that we have to, as I mentioned to Matt, we're going to have to take some serious steps to get our fiscal house in order. But we understand, we know what happens. We know the catastrophic actions with things like Social Security and Medicare if you threaten the solvency of the government.
So he only voted that way because he knew that it was going to pass.
And I think clearly he was sending a message.
But he knew it was going to pass. That's why he voted against it that way.
His vote was not necessarily needed on that.
If my Republican friends believe that increasing our debt by almost $800 billion today and more than $3 trillion over the last 5 years is the right thing to do, they should be upfront about it. They should explain why they think that more debt is good for our economy. How can the Republican majority in this Congress explain to their constituents that trillions of dollars of new debt is good for our economy? How can they explain that they think it's fair to force our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren to finance this debt through higher taxes? That's what it'll have to be. Why is it right to increase our nation's dependence on foreign creditors? They should explain this. Maybe they can convince the public they're right. I doubt it. Because most Americans know that increasing debt is the last thing we should be doing. After all, I repeat, the baby boomers are about to retire. Under the circumstances, any credible economist would tell you we should be reducing debt, not increasing it. Democrats won't be making arguments to support this legislation, which will weaken our country. Weaken our country. We're being asked to do what shouldn't be asked of us, to increase the debt to almost $9 trillion. I hope everyone walking down to these desks today will understand what they're doing to our country. On this side of the aisle, we know. Thank you, Madam President.
Now, today's agreement enshrines, I think, a principle into law that will remain in place as long as I am president. The deficit needs to be reduced in a way that's balanced. Everyone pays their fair share. Everyone does their part. That's how our economy works best. That's how we grow. The sum total of all the budget agreements we've reached so far proves that there is a path forward, that it is possible, if we focus not on our politics, but on what's right for the country.